In 2026, Gonzaga will join the Pac-12 as a basketball-only school. But before they get there, they have to find their way back to the Sweet 16. Let's talk about it right here on the Pac-12 Daily Podcast. Can Gonzaga get back to the Sweet 16, something they did for quite a long time? Well, Andy Paton of Locked On Zags is going to help me answer that question. Andy, this was obviously the biggest question going into the offseason after losing the streak. You know, it was a crazy 8-9 seed Gonzaga. They lose to Houston, were they an 8 or a 9 seed Gonzaga?
They were an 8 seed, and my goodness, they had a really, really good chance to win that game against Houston and get back to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, it was such a good game. And like you look at all the 8-9 seeds really across this entire tournament this past March, it was insane. But of course, I was glued to the Houston Gonzaga game. It had so much streaks on the line, and that 9-year streak, something that was tied for the best in college basketball history, comes to an end. Now, you look to the new year. This is the final year in the WCC for Gonzaga before you get to join over with the new Pac-12. And that's what we're, of course, talking about here on the Pac-12 Daily. And I got to ask you, what are your feelings about Gonzaga heading into the final year of the WCC?
Yeah, it's a kind of a mixed bag of feelings, I think, for the roster in particular, but also just for kind of the departure from the WCC. It's obviously been a conference that has been very good to Gonzaga, despite a national narrative that it hurts them. I don't think that has been the case. And I think the aforementioned 9 straight years of making the Sweet 16 sort of kind of puts that to rest a little bit, especially as we've seen the West Coast Conference get stronger. Teams like St. Mary's have been very consistently in the tournament. San Francisco, Santa Clara have been very good. But, for Gonzaga, I think this is a positive move to the Pac-12, of course, better conference, better teams, staying out in the West Coast. And I think it's going to be fantastic. And for this final year, it'll be a little bittersweet to leave a conference that has, the kind of connection that Gonzaga's had with this league for over 40 years. For me personally, I live close enough that I can go to the University of Portland, and I'm a little farther away from Corvallis, so it'll be a little bit more of a trek for me when they play Oregon State. But I think this is a very positive move for Gonzaga overall in terms of joining the Pac-12, and I'm excited to see how they do this final season here in the WCC.
Yeah, I want to talk more about the Pac-12 entrance in just a few minutes, because that is technically next season. We do have one more season to worry about. July 2026 is when it becomes official, but I wasn't waiting around. I want to make sure I drop this show here to get a good overview and get all these new teams involved. Let's just go back to last season real quick. How would you overall describe Gonzaga's 2024-25 season overall? Did they meet expectations? Of course, that Sweet 16 thing kind of obviously puts a little damper in it. Or would you say they fell short compared to the Bulldog standard?
Yeah, they fell short. I mean, I think that one of the best and worst things that happened to them last year was beating the absolute tar out of Baylor on the first night of the season. Everybody watched that game. It was, it was the first kind of marquee game for the entire college basketball season. It was in a standalone night slot at the end of the year or at the end of the night. And I think Gonzaga was 4th in the preseason and Baylor was 8th. It was 2 top 10 teams, and Gonzaga won that game by 38 points. And at that point, anything short of basically an Elite 8 Final Four and a top 5 seed or a top 3 seed in the tournament was going to be a disappointment. And Gonzaga fell well short of that. Of course, Baylor did not end up being as good as many people thought they were going to be as well. But for Gonzaga, they couldn't quite get over the hump in so many of their really strong non-conference games. They lose a heartbreaker to UCLA. They lose a heartbreaker to UConn. They blow an 18-point second half lead against Kentucky in Seattle and lose that game in overtime. They lose to West Virginia in overtime. Like they could not pick up any marquee wins in the non-conference. And as we know, Gonzaga really needs not only a competitive non-conference schedule, but they need to win those games. Not all of them, but they didn't really win any of them last year except for Baylor. And like we said, Baylor didn't end up being nearly as good as fans had hoped they would be. They got a nice road win at San Diego State, but otherwise they just didn't have the resume that we're used to seeing from them. And it was a weird kind of dynamics all season long for Gonzaga because they were consistently in the top 10 of the net. Like almost never dropped below 10th in the net, but their resume did not line up with a top 10 team. They were top 10 at KenPom. They were top 10 at Torvik. They were top 10 in the net. Every analytics model said this is one of the best teams in college basketball. but they couldn't win close games. They could not shut the door on teams they needed to be able to shut the door against. And so at the end of the year, it was kind of, they then lose to St. Mary's a couple of times in the regular season. They lose to Santa Clara in a horrific game where they gave up 100 points at home for the first time in the 20-year history of the McCarthy Athletic Center. And at that point, it was kind of like this team they just don't have the juice. Like something was missing. Their defense wasn't great. There was the worst 3-point shooting team by percentage in the Mark Few era. And those things just culminated in this team not quite being able to reach expectation. By Gonzaga standards, that was a pretty bad year. And I think it merits acknowledgement that a bad year for Gonzaga is coming 1 3-pointer away from going to the Sweet 16. Like, that's what is a bad year for this program. But I think it was one of those, it was just a unique season where a combination of factors kind of led to them not quite reaching that threshold, but we could all see it. It wasn't just like, oh, this team's just straight up not as good and we should just kind of move on and wait for next year. It was like, we know this team is good enough. They have the talent. They just never quite put it together in the timing that they needed to in order to make things work for them last year.
Of course, you talk about Gonzaga all the time on Locked On Zags, and you're talking about them every single day. So you've probably answered this question, or at least pondered it once or twice. You mentioned talking about always losing those close games. That's a terrible identity to have as a team, no matter if it's Gonzaga with an expectations of making the Sweet 16 or somebody who's at the bottom of the net or a Ken Pom ranking. What do you think was, if you had to pinpoint it, was like the core issue, if you had to say one core issue of last year's season?
Yeah, I think it was the defense. I think the defense was just straight up not good enough for this team last year. They lack rim protection. It's a concern coming into this upcoming season as well. They have two of the best front court players in college basketball, but neither of them are good low post defenders. Frankly, for Gonzaga, I mean, they had one great year with Chet Holmgren. They had one great year with Brandon Clark about a decade ago. Other than that, they've really never been a great team at protecting the rim. And that continues to be an issue, especially when they play these super athletic teams, in the SEC or the Big 10 or Big 12. And those guards are able to get to the rim. And when that happens, Gonzaga just does not have enough help right around the cup. And so we saw it last year where Gonzaga was so aware of the fact that they couldn't let guards get past them, that they would really kind of pinch in and prevent guards from driving past them, which left shooters open. Shooters would knock down threes, and it just kind of spiraled into a big issue for them defensively. They also lacked clutch. Like, as much as that's difficult to quantify, there were games last year where they needed a bucket and they just did not have that guy to go to. They didn't have the Jalen Suggs. They didn't have the Andrew Nemhard. They didn't have, those, even the Drew Timmies, like a go-to, get the ball in this guy's hands and just let him go to work. They had some great offensive players, but when they needed a bucket, they struggled to figure out who that ball was going to go to. And it cost them a lot towards the end of the year.
Well, hopefully that can change this coming season, because they need a bounce back, of course. And it's crazy to say bounce back when you're just saying make it to the tournament again. But there, you lose some players, of course. You bring in some new players. That's just the world of college athletics these days with NIL and transfer portal. I want to get your thoughts on that in just a minute. But first, when you talk about the NBA and Gonzaga, they kind of go hand in hand. I would say probably top 5, top 10, maybe at the very least of argument of an NBA kind of college program factory. They do a very good job at bringing in players to produce in the NBA. Of course, losing some players is important, but the main attraction is you bring in some new guys to hopefully get that streak back into games and you get yourself back to the Sweet 16. Tell me about your offseason so far with Gonzaga. When I'm looking at the roster, I'm only seeing 9 on the roster, of course, to the official Gonzaga. So it sounds like there's some scholarships still open, or is it just maybe not updated?
It's just not updated. That's there is a unique wrinkle for Gonzaga right now, in the sense that they're probably second most important, maybe even most important offseason addition is not yet cleared by the NCAA, which is why he's not showing up on the roster. That is Grand Canyon transfer Tyon Grant Foster. Grant Foster averaged 2 years ago at Grand Canyon, he averaged over 20 points per game. He was the Western Athletic Conference Player of the Year. He nearly willed Grand Canyon. He did will them to a win over number 5 seed St. Mary's. St. Mary's, by the way, drew a 12-seeded Grand Canyon in Spokane, which is maybe the worst draw a team that's a rival of Gonzaga could possibly get. But Ty Grant Foster is an excellent, excellent player. He's waiting on a waiver because he's been in college basketball for a very long time, had the junior college eligibility that should grant him an extra year, but hasn't been given it yet. He's going to be their starting three, and he's probably going to be their second or third leading scorer. But at this point, he has yet to practice with the team. He has yet to be enrolled in classes. Like, he can't really do anything while we wait for the NCAA to grant him a waiver. So that's been a huge frustration for this staff, I imagine, and for the fan base, as I'm hearing every single day on social media, what's up with Tyon? What's up with Tyon? What's up with Tyon? And I have told all of them, like, I promise you, I'm not sitting on information. If I knew what was going on, I would tell you.
Yeah.
I do not. If the coaching staff knew what was going on and could tell you, they would. We just don't know what's going on.
What is the reason for delay? Like, do we even know that reason?
Nope, no clue. I mean, his situation's weird. He's going to be 26 this year. I can understand why the NCAA wants to be cautious about awarding eligibility to a 26-year-old, but he also missed 2 years with a heart condition. He also, one of the few years he has played was during the COVID year, so he should get eligibility for that. A player for USC, Chad Baker-Mazara, has played 50 more Division I games, and he was granted an extra year, so I don't know why we have so much delay on hesitation on Grant Foster, but it is that the NCAA is going to NCAA. So that's the status there. They do also have a really, really high profile freshman coming in from Spain, 19-year-old Mario Saint-Superi, who just represented Spain on the national stage at the Eurobasket event. He was the youngest player to play for Spain in that event since Ricky Rubio back in 2009. And Mario has drawn a lot of comparisons to Ricky Rubio and could end up being one of the best players on this roster, even as a true freshman and even as a guy who hasn't been on campus for more than a couple of weeks at this point. So it's a new look roster for Gonzaga. They lost 4 starters from last year's team who all graduated. They also lost 3 reserves who entered the transfer portal. So there's some new faces, but you return the 2 bigs, Graham Ike and Braden Huff. You return some key pieces coming off the bench from last year. You have a guy coming off injury in Steele Venters, who was an excellent, excellent shooter. And you add another transfer, Adam Miller from Arizona State, who shot 43% from 3 last year. That's all you need him to do. Just float to the corner, knock down open threes. I think he could shoot 45% in Gonzaga's offense this year. So they got some pieces that I think really fit and work with what they need to do, but there's still a lot of things kind of up in the air right now, particularly with that waiver from the NCAA.
You know, when I look at this roster, and of course it's not updated, but when I look at one of the biggest things that came to my mind was they do a lot of in-state recruiting, or at least bring in a lot of in-state players. They have a Seattle prep player and Braden Smith. They have a guy from Kent, Washington, and Michael Jaye.
He was on the team last year, but yeah.
Okay. Yeah, but they're on the team again. It's not with portals, but they bring in a lot of in-state players with this new world of NIL and the transfer portal and all that stuff. And of course, moving to the Pac-12 next season, a lot of veteran coaches have this issue, and we see it in all of college athletics, not just basketball, but football as well, where some of these veteran coaches have a tough time adapting to this new transfer portal and NIL world, and they finds themselves pushing out. It doesn't sound like that's working or happening with Mark Few. What is your thought process on that?
Yeah, Mark Few and Gonzaga have they've always been very good at being a little bit on the cutting edge of roster management and construction in college basketball. They utilized international players well before that became a popular thing. I mean, some of the early greats in Mark Few's tenure, the Roni Turiafs, the JP Batistas, the Kelly Olynyk's, guys like that were international players before a lot of college teams were doing that. Gonzaga also exploited what wasn't really a loophole, but the graduate transfer rules, which at the time was the only way you could have a player transfer to your program and play right away. And Gonzaga did that like 5 years in a row. They brought in grad transfers who were immediately impactful for this team. And then now the rules have, of course, changed, but they've always been kind of able to find ways to make these rosters work. Their player development is top notch. I mean, at an elite level for this program. And so I'm continually impressed by what they're able to do. And sure, they're having more players transfer out of the program than they have in previous eras, because that's happening everywhere at every school. But this team really has not lost any players who were significant contributors. I can't think of a player who started consistently for Gonzaga who has transferred. They lost Hunter Salas, who ended up becoming an all WCC or all ACC player at Wake Forest, but he wasn't a starter when he transferred out of Gonzaga. Like they really do not lose players because the players who they're selective about who they bring in, and they bring in guys who they think are going to buy into the system, who don't have those egos, and who really are going to kind of want to be here for multiple years, because you've seen, as you mentioned earlier in the show, the NBA track record. Like Gonzaga's got more players in the NBA than all but 4 schools in college basketball, and that's with Gonzaga having only ever recruited 4 5-star players. That's it. Jalen Suggs, Chet Holmgren, Zach Collins are 3 of them, and they were all one-and-done players. But outside of that, Gonzaga's putting 3-star guys in the NBA. They're putting seldom known transfers in the NBA. They're putting international players that nobody had heard of in the NBA. Like their ability to, if you buy into their system and you spend 2, 3, 4 years in Spokane, there's a pretty good chance you're going to turn into a really, really good player. And so they have succeeded because they've gotten those players to do that and buy in.
That's a track record that probably not many programs, if any, can say that they're not only finding talent when it comes to the stars, but finding good fits and becoming and making them professionals. That's really impressive. Moving to the Pac-12, let's talk about that real quick. Although it's July 2026, I know it's early, but it's never too early on this show. When we're talking transfer portal, I brought up the Washington State kids on purpose because now you're going to be in a conference with Washington State. You're going to be in a conference with Oregon State. Of course, you're still battling with UW. You get to go against your, probably we could call a rival in San Diego State down on the coast because of the basketball rivalries you've had in the past. How do you think that changes recruiting and your NIL? Do you think the collectives are going to maybe push up in budget? Are you going to see maybe a little bit more push because you're in the Pac-12? Or do you see that maybe stalling out this when they do switch to conferences?
I think Gonzaga's got a massive advantage heading into the Pac-12 to the point where I think the other schools in the conference are probably not thrilled about this because, and while we do not know at this point, of course, the exact amount of money that this media deal is going to pay each of the programs in the Pac-12, what we do know is that Gonzaga is a full share. They are getting the exact same amount of money from the conference as every other full school in the conference, with the exception of Texas State, who is not getting a full share. And so for Gonzaga, they're the only school that doesn't have to split that money with football. And from what we're seeing, at least on the power conference level, the general expectation is that most of those football programs are going to spend 75% of their money on football. And so if you're Boise State or San Diego State or Utah State, whomever, you're probably spending the majority of that money on football. Boise State's probably 75 or higher. San Diego State, maybe they're a little bit lower because they have a very successful basketball program. But Gonzaga is going to spend the vast majority of this money on their men's basketball program. They'll spend some on baseball. They'll spend some on women's basketball. That's about it. So if you assume we're talking about, say, exactly $10 million media deal, just for simplicity, if Gonzaga's spending $8 million of that on their men's basketball program, San Diego State's not. Boise State's not. Like Washington State and Oregon State, they're not doing that. And they may have more money, especially those big state schools. They may have more additional money that they can spend. But I'd be shocked, frankly, if Gonzaga's not spending more money on their men's basketball team than everybody else in the Pac-12. And I think that gives them obviously that gives them a tremendous advantage. And we're kind of seeing that already right now, where Gonzaga is incredibly aggressive in pursuing recruits in the 2026 and 2027 recruiting classes. I haven't landed anybody yet because there hasn't been a lot of commitments in those classes, but I think that Gonzaga is going really hard after some 5-star high-level talent because they can say, hey, we can get you $800,000 or we can get you $1.5 million. And we know that. And these other programs, if they're promising you that, they're lying to you because they don't know that they're going to have that amount of money because of the House settlement and because of the amount of money that their programs are going to promise to their football teams. So Gonzaga's in a really kind of a position similar to the Big East schools where they like Villanova. And I know Villanova has football, but like St. John's and Marquette and Creighton and those teams don't have football to compete with. So they're going to have some extra dough too. So I think Gonzaga's in a unique spot. I think they're in an advantageous spot. I think it will change probably pretty soon as programs figure out how to circumvent the salary caps and how to circumvent the NIL Go system and figure out a way to get their guys money. But I do think that right now Gonzaga is actually sitting pretty as they get into the Pac-12.
Yeah, you talk about some of those other factories programs that find themselves into the NBA, like Arizona, Kansas,
Mhm.
Duke, North Carolina. They all have football programs that they're trying to build up and improve.
Mhm.
So with this new model, you're right. Hey, you sold me. Hey,
Mhm.
before we go here, the
Mhm.
non-conference schedule looks really exciting. But
Mhm.
before I get to the non-conference schedule, if people are not aware, tell me, what is the craziness in the kennel? What
Mhm.
explain that to me, because that's happening October 4th.
Yeah, it's their first kind of live practice of the year. I think other programs do this. I think I'm struggling to remember what Duke calls theirs, but I know they have a specific name for it. I think it's the blue and white game for Kentucky. It's basically just like the first live practice of the year. For Gonzaga, it's open to the fans, it's open to the community, so it'll be the first kind of chance for people to see the new players. They'll do a 5-on-5 scrimmage. They'll do a 3-point contest. They used to do a dunk contest, but somebody got hurt, so now they don't do a dunk contest anymore. But it's basically just kind of a first glimpse at the new players on the roster and their new jersey numbers, and kind of getting a chance for them to experience the kennel for the first time.
I love it. Yeah, that sounds exciting and always a good way to start the season. I can't wait to watch Gonzaga basketball this year, although it's not Pac-12 yet, but I'm excited to see what it looks like in the future. This non-conference schedule looks pretty exciting. A lot of SEC names on there, a lot
Mhm.
of Big Ten names on there. You, of course, playing the Players Era Championship
Mhm.
in Las Vegas. What are like maybe 2 or 3 of the non-conference games that really stick out to you that say that's the way, going back to what we said at the beginning of this conversation, to
Mhm.
change the identity of this team and get yourself back to the Sweet 16?
Yeah, I think you got to start with Oregon, which is not the best team on the schedule necessarily. That's probably Kentucky or UCLA, but Oregon is a unique story here because Mark Few actually went to the University of Oregon. He started at a D3 school in Oregon called Linfield, and then he got his degree from Oregon. And because of that, they don't play each other. Like Mark Few's been the head coach since 1999, and these two programs have played each other twice in the last 26 years, and both of them were part of tournaments. They never actually intentionally scheduled each other. And this is the first time that has happened literally since 1984, that these two teams have played each other willingly as part of a single game. And it happened because Baylor dropped out of playing Gonzaga kind of at the last minute, and Gonzaga needed a new game on their schedule, and Oregon had an opportunity. And so that's kind of how this game came together. So fans are really excited about this game purely because we haven't seen these two teams square off pretty much ever, and Oregon looks like they're going to be very, very good this year. So that one really stands out to me. I'm excited to go to that game. It'll be in Portland, so that'll make it even more fun. A lot of Zags fans are going to be there, but I imagine a lot of Duck fans are going to be there too. Outside of that, I mean, Kentucky, it's the fourth year in a row out of a 6-year series that Mark Few agreed to initially with Coach John Calipari. Gonzaga beat Kentucky the first 2 years under Coach Cal last year. Mark Pope's first year, like I said, Gonzaga had an 18-point second half lead and blew it and lost that game in Seattle. So they would love a little revenge in Nashville this year for that game. And then UCLA, the history between Gonzaga and UCLA goes back 20 years to Gonzaga blowing that 17-point lead in the NCAA tournament. Adam Morrison famously crying on the floor. That's kind of an iconic moment in Gonzaga basketball history. Fortunately for Gonzaga fans, they also have their iconic moment against UCLA, which was Jalen Suggs hitting that 37-foot bank shot three in the Final Four to send Gonzaga to a national championship in 2021. So there's a lot of history between these two programs, and this will be UCLA beat Gonzaga last year in LA, so Gonzaga would love to get them this year in Seattle. I think those are the three that really stand out, but I'm also pumped that Gonzaga gets Creighton at home. They really struggle to get high-profile programs to play them in Spokane, like at the McCarthy Athletic Center, because of how small it is and intimate of a venue it is. And Creighton being willing to play Gonzaga in a true road game is a testament to Coach Greg McDermott's willingness to do so. I commend him for that, and Gonzaga will pay it forward with a road game for them next year, but I'm excited for that game as well.
Lots of fun stuff coming up. 6 weeks when actual games start for Gonzaga. Lots of good stuff. I'm sure we're going to have another conversation very soon when the season actually gets there. But until then, Andy, where can everyone find your work? Because I know you're always talking about the Zags.
Yeah, absolutely. You can find me on social media, Andy Patton, CBB, obviously Locked on Zags. You can find wherever you find your podcasts. I also am a writer for Gonzaga Bulldogs on SI, Sports Illustrated site covering the Zags, so you can find any written content about them there as well. Christian, thanks for having me on, man. I love talking Zag hoops, so this is going to be a really fun season coming up.
I appreciate that as well. This is going to wrap it up for the episode of the Pac-12 Daily. We'll see you back here next time. Take care.